सहनावतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। We will chant Ishavasya Upanishad by starting.
पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। शान्तिः शान्तिः। ॐ ईशावास्यमिदं सर्वं यत्किञ्च जगत्यां जगत् येन त्यक्तेन वञ्चितामाकृतं तस्य स्विद्धनम्। कुर्वन्नेवेह कर्माणि जिजीविषेचततो समाः। एवं त्वयितान्यथेतोऽस्ति न कर्म लिप्यते न ये। असूर्यानामते लोका अन्धेन तमसावृताः। तादस्ते प्रेत्याभिगच्छन्ति ये केचात्मनो जनाः। यदेकं मनसो जवीयो नैन देवापूर्वमर्षत्। तथावतो ज्ञानज्ञेष्ठस्तस्मिन् नभो मातरिष्वान् तदेजति तन्नैजति तद्दूरे तद्वन्दिके। तदन्तरस्य सर्वस्य तत् सर्वस्यास्य बाह्यतः। यस्तु सर्वाणि भूतान्यात्मन्येवानुपश्यति। सर्वभूतेषु चात्मानं ततो न विजुगुप्सते। यस्मिन् सर्वाणि भूतान्यात्मैवाभूद्भिजानतः। तत्र को मोहः कः शोकहेतत्त्वमनुपश्यतः। सपर्यगाच्छुक्रमकाय स्नाभिरगुंशुद्धमपापविद्धम्। कवेर्मनीषी परिभूस्वयं भूयात्तोर्भाग्यशाश्वतीभ्यः समाभ्यः। अन्धं तमः प्रविशन्ति ये विद्यामुपासते। ततो भूय निमते तमो यो विद्यायामुन्नतः। इति शुश्रुमधीराणां येन तद्विचक्षिरे सम्भूतिं च विनाशं च यस्तद्वेदो भयभूसः विनाशेन मृत्युं तीर्त्वा सम्भूत्यामृतमश्नुते हिरण्मयेन पात्रेण सत्यस्यापि हितं मुखम् तत्त्वं पूषन्नपातृण सत्यधर्माय दृष्टये पूषन्ने कर्षेयमसूर्यप्राजापत्यव्यूहरश्मि समोहतेजो यत्ते रूपं कल्याणतमं तत्ते पश्यामि योऽसामसौ पुरुषः सोऽहमस्मि वायुरनिलममृतमथेदं भस्मान् कर्तुं शरीरम् ॐ कृतोस्मर कृतकोस्मर कृतोस्मर कृतकोस्मर अन्तेन सुपथानाय अस्मान् विश्वनि देव वयुनानि विद्वान् जयोजस्मञ्जुपुराणमेनो शान्तेन मुक्तिं विधेम
So we have been studying the mantra ninth. We will continue with quick recap. Mantra 9. Andham tamah pravishanti ye vidyamupasate tato bhuya ivate tamoya vidhyaya gumrataha. Andham tamah pravishanti ye vidyamupasate tato bhuya ivate tamoya vidhyaya gumrataha. So, as we are trying to understand the mantra, the translation last class, those who worship avidya, ignorance, enter into blinding darkness, but those who revel in vidya, knowledge, enter into greater darkness than that. So, this is most important for understanding what is our priorities, what is our goal, where are we at this moment. We have to be crystal clear about it. The fifth topic comprises the two sets of mantras. The first set is 9, 10 and 11. The second set is 12, 13, 14. The second set is a parody of the first set. Means both are similar. A verbatim repetition of the same thought except for a change in a few words with the same meaning. Together they provide an intent. So the only thing everyone is looking for is spiritual enlightenment. To get the spiritual, the integral human, as we all know, human mature himself, obligation in life, fundamental obligated duty of spiritual enlightenment. Everyone, almost all, are caught up in this affair of the world, lost in the affairs in terms of perceptions, emotions, and thoughts. Everybody is caught up in perceptions, emotions, and thoughts. The mass of humanity, the entire mire, the quagmire of avidya. Avidya means ignorance. This ignorance is the of self-realization. The moment you are born, you are fixed. The humanity are misled by misled spiritual practitioners of Vidya who claim to follow Vidya, who claim to have following the Vidya knowledge. Spiritual disciplines, spiritual practice way. Either people are caught up in the world or they are caught up in the spiritual courses in the spiritual pursuit. Both courses, they have lost sight of their ultimate goal. Consequently, in utter caught up. The words avidya and vidya used here mean ignorance and knowledge. Ignorance and knowledge. So avidya is ignorance, vidya is knowledge. The avidya in this context refers to emotional thoughts of the world, external world. They are called external. Would mean an untiring pursuit of all that the world offers. All so, if you carefully analyze the upasate means worshipping avidya. Worshipping avidya would mean an untiring pursuit of all that the world offers. All that the world offers is avidya. Rataha means reveling, enjoying. Thus, reveling in vidya would mean indulge spiritual practices. Practices is called vidya. Reveling means enjoying, caught up in the spiritual practices. Avidya is people who caught up in the worldly practices, which is world, which is the perception, emotion, and thoughts. In two ways, vidya and avidya. You just have to understand these two words, that's all. Vidya is knowledge, avidya is ignorance, emotion, thoughts. Avidya means, vidya means knowledge of spiritual practice. People are caught up. The mantra exposes the pathetic state of mankind. The mantra exposes the pathetic state of mankind. What is the pathetic state of mankind? The vast majority being lost in the world, in the maze of acquisition, enjoyment. That is the vast majority of people. They are desire-ridden life. They lead a life of result-oriented, desire-ridden life. They are following a life of attachment and possessiveness. Attachment and possessiveness controls their life. So, a life of suffering and sorrow. So, vast majority caught up in this acquisition and enjoyment, materiality and sensuality. The few minority of the entire humanity pursue spiritual paths, admitting themselves to some kind of spiritual discourses, pursuing spiritual masters, ashrams, gurus. So, this is This is a second set of minority spiritual paths. What they do? They follow Karma Yoga for path of action, Bhakti Yoga, path of emotion, Jnana Yoga, path of knowledge. These three are the paths human being, few minority among the human beings whose spiritual path gets entangled. These paths are meant for a means to an end, a goal to reach for the enlightenment. They are not the end in themselves. You should not be caught up in the spiritual practices as an end in themselves and lost in themselves. This is the weakness of spiritual practitioners. But rarely indeed does one use, rarely indeed the one uses for spiritual enlightenment. But rarely indeed the goal is to get enlightenment done. Enchanting. Spiritual pursuit is enchanting. Merely following the spiritual path becomes pleasurable, enjoyable. If you take up a spiritual path, it is very enjoyable, very pleasurable. Spiritual practitioners become involved and addicted to the joy derived from the practices itself. They get addicted, they get caught up, they get entangled, lost in the spiritual practices. They revel in the enjoyment of the very material benefit from them. Some people practicing spiritual disciplines for gaining material benefit. They also revel in the fruits accruing therefrom. In either case, their enjoyment remains mundane. Their enjoyment remains mundane. Such practice ceases to be spiritual since it is not direct to the ultimate goal of enlightenment. There is no ultimate goal of enlightenment. The practice is meant for these seekers for revelry instead of the reality, the fundamental, and gain the enlightenment. Instead of that, they get lost in the reveling of the spiritual practices. They treat their practice as an end in itself. Such people are also doomed to blinding darkness, even greater darkness, greater than those immersed in worldly pursuits. Those who are immersed in the worldly pursuits. So, the mantra makes a staggering statement. Mantra makes a staggering statement that those pursuing the divine path, those who are pursuing the divine path, those who are pursuing the divine path are lost in the greater darkness than those running after the world. This paradox is meant to serve as an abundant caution to seekers caught up in the enchantment of the spiritual path. Spiritual path, no doubt, is meant to take you to enlightenment, but one should not get entangled in the spiritual path and consider the spiritual path as an end in itself. This is going to take you to the greater darkness. the quality of the enjoyment derived from the spiritual practice is far superior to that of worldly indulgences. Consequently, most seekers of all fail and fall a prey into its enchantment and that is the ultimate goal they are lost the sight of. They are lost in the ecstasy of the subtle enjoyment of the spiritual disciplines. They are enjoying the spiritual disciplines rather than the ultimate goal of the self. They are not able to progress. Little do they realize that such enjoyment is still mundane, still worldly, not going to give you the everlasting joy of the Supreme Self. Hence, the mantra states that pursuers of Vidya lead themselves to greater darkness. Pursuers of Vidya lead them to greater darkness than pursuing Avidya. Avidya anyway will lead you to the worldly darkness. Vidya leads to great darkness. Then what is the solution in maintaining one's objectivity right through life? The only clue, the only caution, the only solution to this problem of getting entangled to the blinding darkness and greater darkness is practicing and maintaining objectivity right through life till you reach the enlightenment. The intellect must remain ever alert. The Swamiji is telling about the personal rehabilitation. The highlight of the talk is to use and develop and strengthen your intellect. It is the intellect which controls, which maintains the objectivity, not to get attached to the world or in the spiritual disciplines, which is equally worldly. In not letting the mind get involved, firstly in the affairs of the world, and then more significantly in the enchantment of spiritual practices themselves. The spiritual practices also you must not get involved. A perfect seeker uses spiritual practices. Who is a perfect seeker? Who is a perfect student of spirituality? A perfect seeker is one who uses the spiritual paths of karma, bhakti, jnana for the path of action, devotion and knowledge as a means to reach the enlightenment, to attain self-realization, God realization. These practices are, however, noble, still belong to the world, but they also belong to the world. Lost in them, he makes good use of them to purify the mind thoroughly by using these spiritual practices of karma, bhakti, jnana. Purify the mind thoroughly and then employ the purified mind to meditate on the single pointed thought concentration upon the self of the Supreme God to the exclusion of all other gods. You use that mind to keep the mind on the single thought of the God, which is called meditation, and then realize the Supreme Self within. So a spiritual seeker's exercise is akin to that of a pole vaulter. You ought to understand pole vaulting. A pole vaulter uses the pole. What is that he uses the pole? He uses a long pole to cross a high bar set for the crossing. He runs with the pole, a pole vaulter runs with the pole, pegs one end of the pole on the ground, lifts himself up with the pegging on the ground and lifting his body up and up and up. That is pole vaulting. With the other end until he reaches the bar, level of the bar, and throws himself on the other side without disturbing the bar and leaves the pole. It is obvious that no pole vaulter can cross the bar without the pole. Without the help of the pole vaulter, without using the pole, cannot lift himself. So without the pole vaulter cannot cross the bar. But ironically, it is also true, no pole vaulter can cross the bar with the pole. So without the pole, you can't cross the bar because you need to lift yourself. Holding on to the pole, you hit the bar and lose the contact. You have to use the bar until you lift yourself up and drop it. Similarly, no seeker can cross over from the terrestrial to the transcendental. No seeker, no spiritual student can cross over this world to the transcendental supreme God, Brahman, without the help of the spiritual disciplines, spiritual practices. Impossible. That is called vidya, which is knowledge. You need the Upanishadic knowledge. You need Bhagavad Gita. You need Upanishads. You need Vedanta. With this knowledge only you can cross this world and reach the Supreme God, Brahman. This is the only way. Just like a pole. Equally so, none can reach the transcendental. None can reach the self. Transcendental means beyond the terrestrial world by merely indulging in the spiritual practices. You have to make good use of them, but none can reach the transcendental reality by merely indulging in spiritual practices. If you indulge in spiritual practices, you can't reach the one jnana. To reach the highest state of detachment and drop them finally to cross over to the transcendental reality, Brahman. So, Brahman, the Supreme God, is beyond the world, beyond the body, mind, intellect. So, you have to use the body to transcend the body. You have to use the mind to transcend the mind. You have to use the intellect to transcend the intellect, to reach the self. Use the world to go beyond the world. If you get caught up in the world, you are in blinding darkness. If you are caught up in the spiritual practices and indulging in the spiritual practices, not using them to reach the self, you are in greater darkness. Today, that's what happening in the religion field. All the religious people, religious so-called heads, they are caught up in the utter ignorance of greater darkness. So, this is the meaning and message of the blinding darkness, avidya, greater darkness, vidya. Both are deadly attachments. Either you are attached to the world or you are attached to the spiritual master or spiritual disciplines, you will not reach the Supreme God. Now we will study mantra 10. Anyadeva purvidyaya anyada puravidyaya iti shushmadhiranam onastat vichachakshire anyadeva purvidyaya anyada puravidyaya iti shushrumathiranam ye nastat vichachakshire. So now what is that 10th mantra? What is 10th mantra is telling is translation, verse translation. The wise having declared that the result of vidya, knowledge, and avidya, ignorance, are distinct and different. Vidya and avidya, both are distinct and different. Thus have we heard from those who have expounded to us. It's very interesting. Very, very interesting. The greatness of Upanishadic masters. The wise have declared that the result of vidya, knowledge, and are distinct and different. Thus have we heard from those who have expounded that to us. So what does that mean here? The mantra 10 and mantra 11 continue the thought of expounded in mantra 9. So whatever mantra 9, which is more and more explained in the mantra 10 and 11. The last mantra states that both the material and spiritual paths, avidya and vidya, material path is avidya, spiritual path is vidya, both are worldly, leading to blinding darkness. This mantra, however, proclaims that the results accruing therefrom two paths are distinct and different. These two mantras seem to be a contradiction. There is a contradiction in the two mantras. Mantra 9 states that a practitioner following the spiritual path plunges himself into blinding darkness even greater than that into which a materialist falls. Anyway, a materialist or sensualist is in the world, caught up in the world. But the person who is in the spiritual path goes into greater darkness, more blinding than a person who is caught in the world. This staggering state is meant to caution spiritual seekers against falling a prey to the enchantment of their practice, thereby ruining their spiritual progress. So, you lose your spiritual progress by gets entangled, get caught up, this approach to the spiritual practice. They use the practice for satisfying for only gaining personal benefits, personal ends, and label it as spiritual. They claim that they are practicing spirituality, but the aim is to satisfy personal ends. Whereas in this mantra, the master speaks of proper spiritual practice with self-realization as its goal. So, this mantra gives the master speak of the proper, in which case the result accruing from that of the mundane pursuit. So, the mundane pursuit is different from spiritual pursuit. So, the worldly pursuit can never make you run off in the world, run for money, run for name, run for fame. So, if you analyze the worldly pursuits, the worldly pursuits can never give you true satisfaction and true happiness. All the worldly pursuits, they make you suffer at the end. They don't give you true happiness. You can find out a person who is running after the wealth, he gets more wealth, but he is craving for wealth, never satisfying. A person who gets a partner, gets married, and he wants to indulge in family, and he is never gets satisfied with the family and relationships, keeps on increasing. Similarly, a person who is running after this name and fame, he gets the name and fame, but he is never satisfied with the name and fame. It keeps on increasing, growing. The desire is growing but never gets satisfied, never gets happiness. So, if you carefully analyze, the worldly pursuit can never make you truly satisfied and happy. Swami Ramatirtha, the great apostle of truth, great Vedantin, spells it out beautifully. Iron and gold only good for buying iron and gold, nothing else. Iron and gold only good for buying iron and gold, nothing else. What does it imply? So, the wealth and running after the world will give you only a temporary pleasure and leading to permanent sorrow. They will never give you satisfaction and happiness. Happiness is not of the same kind as material objects are. These material objects can give you temporary happiness and permanent sorrow. Moreover, pursuing the material path, one accumulates desires, vasanas, which gets them caught up in the cycle of birth and death, goes through suffering and sorrow, devolves to an abyss of ignorance. Hence, the pursuit of this world, avidya, is said to be to lead one to blinding darkness. A person is caught up in blinding darkness because of the worldly pursuit. On the contrary, the proper pursuit of the self, if you are able to fix the goal of the Supreme Self within and consistently pursue the Supreme Self with the proper spiritual disciplines called Vidya, that leads the seeker to the true peace and happiness. Your happiness keeps increasing. If you consistently pursue the Supreme God, Supreme Self with the proper spiritual disciplines, it is the spiritual disciplines, you use them to reach the Supreme God, Vidya. Thereby, your vasanas, your desires gets exhausted. Your vasanas supposed to be get exhausted. That is the aim of spiritual disciplines. We gains the knowledge of the self. So the moment you gain the knowledge of the self, the vasanas, the desires reduce. Ultimately, they will get exhausted. Then you will be evolving. That evolves you to the state of spiritual enlightenment. You reach the enlightenment by exhaustion of your desires, vasanas, with the knowledge of the self. Thus, the result of accruing from vidya is fundamentally different from that avidya. So, the vidya is different from avidya. So, the vidya has a distinct and different result. So, you have to understand the sage imparting the knowledge herein also displays humility. So, vidya always goes with vinaya. Vinaya means humility. The sage, the realized soul who is giving this knowledge, he displays the great quality of humility by attributing the knowledge what he is imparting to his gurus. He is not having any slightest arrogation of himself. He humbly acknowledges the source of the knowledge which is imparting as the wisdom of this to the wisdom of the ancient sages whom he got it from. An example of reliance on the traditional knowledge, agami, traditional knowledge. So, knowledge you gain from the sages and saints. So, it is not your own knowledge. A person who understands becomes truly humble. Today, people gain the knowledge, they get arrogant. They claim that that is their own. This is the sad thing of humanity. Despite these great masters, the Upanishadic masters, even though they gain the knowledge, their enlightened souls, they never attributed the knowledge is their own. They displayed the humility and claiming that this knowledge they got it from the ancient masters of their ancient sages and saints. This is the greatness of these Upanishadic masters. Humbly acknowledges the source of knowledge as the wisdom of the ancient sages and saints. That's how we heard from our masters. The same thing even displayed in the Bhagavad Gita by Lord Krishna himself. Prahuhu, he says. Means when Arjuna asks, how did you get this knowledge from? Where did you get this knowledge from? The Lord Krishna says, I got it from my masters. I got it from my masters. No arrogation to themselves. The knowledge they attributed to the sages and saints. This is the greatness of humility. Vidya always goes with Vinaya. Vinayam is humility. Vidya is knowledge. Knowledge and humility. Vidya and Vinayam. If you don't have Vinayam, you don't have knowledge. This is the law. Whether you understand it, the moment you understand, you have knowledge, you become humble. There are 4 distinct ways of gaining knowledge. Pratyaksha, perception, direct perception. Gaining knowledge through senses, sense organs. Once your eyes see that object, you gain the knowledge of that particular object. That is called direct perception, pratyaksham. Second one is anumanam. Anumanam means inference. Is an indirect means of acquiring knowledge. So you gain the knowledge through inference. Example is, you see the smoke, you infer there is a fire. There is a fire from a distance you can't see, but there is a smoke coming. Because you have the knowledge of wherever there is a fire, there is a smoke. So you see smoke from a distance and you infer there is a fire. That is anumana, inference. Third one is upama. Upama means comparison. Comparison means another practical way of gaining knowledge through comparison. The scriptural knowledge imparted liberally uses this method of comparison. We also studied in the previous class by Guruji. Mind is like a river flowing and the intellect is like a banks. When the banks are strong, the water is under control and irrigating the agricultural fields for the cultivation and production of the grains and prosperity in a disciplined way. If the banks are not strong, means intellect is not strong, the mind goes out of the control. The water in the river goes out of control, inundates, submerges the fields on either side and destroys the crops. This is the comparison. Comparison is liberally used in the scriptural language to drive home these eternal truths, abstract truths. Mind is a thought flow which is compared to the river. Intellect is the banks, which is the controller, regulator, moderator of the thought flow. So this comparison is a very important, very great, useful tool for the communication of the spiritual formulas, spiritual laws. The scripture liberally uses this method, various metaphors and similes to convey subtle concepts. Agami. Agami means tradition. The tradition, the scripture places a great reliance on traditional language. Traditional knowledge is most important. Why? Because it is the time-tested truths laid down by the galaxy of sages and saints. The galaxy of the great masters. They laid down this knowledge by their experiments, by their personal experiences. They derived these formulas and gave it to us. Therefore, it is a traditional knowledge. So, the traditional knowledge, the scripture places the great reliance on the traditional knowledge laid down by the galaxy of sages and saints of the yore. There is a reference to the traditional source of knowledge, which is Agami. Agami is traditional knowledge. So, these are all sources of knowledge. So, the wise have declared, the mantra says, the wise have declared that the result of the vidya knowledge and avidya ignorance are distinct and different. Thus have we heard from those who have expounded that to us. So, you have to understand the ignorance is avidya, which is caught up in the world of perception, emotion, and thoughts of the external world. That is called blinding darkness. The result is only vasanas and unhappiness and sorrow and suffering, and caught up in this law of life of punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, repeated birth and death, because you are constantly accumulating vasanas and desires. The moment you understand the scripture, understand the shastras, understand the spiritual practices, and you use them for the enlightenment, for reaching of the Supreme Self, not as an end in themselves, to enjoy the spiritual disciplines and gets lost in them, that kind of result is you get the achievement of the enlightenment. Therefore, vidya is knowledge But if you are not caught up, you will reach the enlightenment. If you are caught up, it is greater darkness, greater blinding darkness, not ordinary blinding darkness. It's most worst darkness, most deep darkness a person might go to. Therefore, use the spiritual disciplines, use the spiritual practices to reach the Supreme God enlightenment, not as end in themselves, like a pole vaulter. Just a repetition, a pole vaulter uses the pole to lift the body to cross the bar which is very high and goes other side. No pole vaulter will cross the bar without the pole. At the same time, no pole vaulter can cross the bar with the pole, because if they cross the bar with the pole, he will knock off the bar and bar will be dislodged. So the horizontal bar cannot be standing. Therefore, to transcend the bar, he has to drop the pole. Similarly, you use the karma, selfless action, you use bhakti, devotion and bhajans and spiritual glories of God, praising God, using emotions towards devotion, and use the subtle knowledge of the scripture, shastras, all three to purify the mind and get rid of the vasanas and desires and maintain your mind on the spiritual self, Supreme God, on single pointed thought until you merge into the Supreme Self. Right through life, you maintain the objectivity with the powerful intellect and alert and awareness. Always you should be alert and aware of your mind's entanglement, either the world or in the spiritual practices. You get lost in both, you will lose the Supreme God. You lose the opportunity given to yourself in this very lifetime. The total life will be wasted. So therefore, and also while studying and learning the scripture, never arrogate this knowledge to yourself. You should be humble. You should be understand this knowledge belong to the great sages and saints, galaxy of masters. You cannot arrogate this knowledge to yourself. That is what the Lord Krishna did in Bhagavad Gita also. Upanishad masters also telling the same thing. You should be humble yourself. You should acknowledge this knowledge. The original source is from the enlightened masters. So never arrogate the knowledge as your own, and understand this knowledge is a means to reach the enlightenment. So once you have that clarity, you will achieve this objective of life in this very lifetime. It is a question of your efforts and commitment and consistency on this traditional knowledge. So the direct perception, the inference, the comparison, these three are only knowledges gained for the world as well as spiritual knowledge, but the ultimate knowledge is through traditional knowledge of the scriptures, which guarantees the human being authentically to reach the Supreme Self. This is the mantra 10 concluded. We'll be continuing mantra 11 in the next class. Thank you very much. Hari Om.